The headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And welcome to this Friday edition of On the Money, where we're focused on the UK's cost of living crisis, helping you beat the squeeze. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour, we'll be talking more about Rishi Sunak's statement yesterday. Not an emergency budget, the Chancellor calls it, but a big spending splurge nonetheless, and not a moment too soon for millions of hard-pressed UK households. But we debate whether Sunak's spending spree raises more questions than it answers. And we check in on financial markets and take a close look at the UK's manufacturing sector, still in the world's top 10. On the Money, after the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Liam. It's 1:02. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson's called the government's £21 billion energy support package a big bazooka that should help the country until energy prices go down. Speaking in County Durham, the Prime Minister added he won't pretend this measure will fix everything immediately, but it will be enough to get the country through what he calls a bumpy time. His comments come as the Chancellor's refused to rule out a further emergency cost of living package next year. Boris Johnson says the package is a very substantial commitment by the government.
I'm not going to pretend that this is going to fix everything for everybody immediately, and there are still going to be pressures, but it's a very, very substantial commitment by the government to getting us through what will be, I'm afraid, still a bumpy time with the increase in energy prices around the world. People should recognise that these payments will not necessarily cover the increased cost fully. I mean, you know, we can't cover every single cost that people are going to face. We've got to be realistic about that.
As news just in, the Conservative MP Paul Holmes has resigned as a parliamentary private secretary to the Home Secretary following the Partygate report. In a statement released on social media, Mr Holmes said he was shocked and angered by the revelations in Sue Gray's report into Downing Street parties during lockdown. Mr Holmes says it shows a culture in Number 10 that was distasteful and has caused a deep mistrust in both the government and the Conservative Party. He added that he now wants to concentrate on his constituency work. Well, Boris Johnson has warned that Russia's making progress in the east of Ukraine. The Prime Minister says Russia's chewing through the ground and has stressed it's vital to provide Kiev with more military support. Ukraine's military, meanwhile, says their troops are retreating from the east and that key routes are being shelled. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Moscow's weaponising the global food crisis and has demanded an end to what he calls Russia's senseless war.
Ukraine will always be an independent state, and it can't be broken. The only question is what price our people will have to pay for their freedom, and Russia for this senseless war against us. And the second, the catastrophic unfolding events could still be stopped if the world treated the situation in Ukraine as its own. If the powers of this world did not play around with Russia, but really pressed to end the war.
America's biggest gun lobby, the National Rifle Association, will hold its annual convention in Texas today. Tens of thousands are expected to attend the event just days after 21 people were killed in a school shooting in the state. 19 students and 2 teachers died when a gunman opened fire at Robb Elementary School in the town of Uvalde. The manufacturers of the assault rifle used in the attack, Daniel Defense, said it wouldn't be attending the meeting as it wasn't the appropriate time to be promoting its products. 6 serving British soldiers and a veteran have been arrested on suspicion of drugs and money laundering offences. The Ministry of Defence confirmed the soldiers from the Irish Guards and former Coldstream Guardsmen were arrested this week. The Irish Guards have been the most operationally active unit in the British Army over recent years. Its 1st Battalion is set to take part in the annual Trooping the Colour ceremony on Thursday as part of the Jubilee celebrations. And Swedish pop group Abba have returned to the stage in London for the first time in 40 years. A warning, the following contains some changes.
The love you gave me, nothing else can save me,
And rather than performing live, the band appeared as digital versions of themselves from the 1970s heyday, thanks to motion capture technology. Accompanied by a live band, the avatars performed around 20 songs during a 90-minute show called Voyage. The real Abba, now in their 70s, were there too, posing for pictures together on the red carpet. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Liam with On the Money.
Coming up on the money today. You see what I did there? Why did Rishi Sunak's spending spree take so long? How will he pay for it? And will it spark more inflation, worsening the very cost of living squeeze the Chancellor says he's trying to solve? It's 24 hours since Sunak unveiled his £15 billion set of cost of living measures, and On the Money delves into the detail. Does the Chancellor's statement raise more questions than its answers? As ever, we hold a detailed discussion. Plus, we check in on financial markets, asking how the pound and share prices have responded to Sunak splashing the cash. And each day On the Money features an in-depth Money Talks interview. Today we meet the double act behind the UK's long-established annual Manufacturing Outlook publication, examining the state of our manufacturing sector, which still employs around 3 million people across the UK, accounting for a fifth of our economy. That's later in the show. And as ever, I want your questions, opinions, ideas. What do you think of the issues raised in today's On the Money? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet @gbnews. I'll read out some of your messages later in the show, so stay with us, because this is GB News on TV, DAB, plus digital radio and online. I'm Liam Halligan, and you're On the Money. Now, for my money, Rishi Sunak's statement yesterday does raise a lot more questions than it answers. Are the Tories still a low-tax party? Will these cost of living measures see vulnerable households through the crisis? Has Rishi Sunak improved or damaged his chances of becoming the next Conservative leader? It's clear that in the Commons yesterday, the Chancellor was determined to splash the cash. Sunak unveiled a huge £15 billion support package, money flying in all directions. This Tory government claims it's now outspending Labour. Politics has been turned on its head. Sunak announced a £650 cost of living allowance for 8.3 million of the UK's most vulnerable households, those on benefits. A £200 loan to offset sky-high household energy bills has been transformed into a £400 grant across all UK households. An additional £300 payment will be made to 8.4 million pensioner households this winter. And on top of that, 6 million people with disabilities, they'll get a one-off £150 payment. To help pay for all this, the government will impose a windfall tax on oil and gas companies making excess profits from high energy prices. But the Chancellor says the energy companies will in return get 91% tax relief on new investments, up from 46% now. Energy companies operating in the North Sea already pay 40% of their profits in tax. That's higher than other firms. Now they'll pay 65% until December 2025. Sunak expects this windfall tax to raise around £5 billion a year. But that all leaves several big questions. First, did Sunak wait until the Sue Gray report was published before using these cost of living measures as a diversion? If so, millions of vulnerable households have endured weeks of worry in the service of the government's spin machine. Second, amidst Sunak's big spending statement delivered on Jeremy Corbyn's birthday, funnily enough, little was said, beyond the windfall tax, of how the Chancellor will pay for it all. And here's the most important question of all. By spending and no doubt borrowing and or printing all of this money, is Rishi Sunak in danger of stoking inflation, worsening the very cost of living crisis he's trying to solve? And that is our On the Money debate today. What are the dangers of Rishi Sunak's big spending statement? Grown-up conversations with people who really know their stuff. That's what we do on The Money today and every day. And I'm delighted to have Peter Smith join me down the line. He's Director of Policy and Advocacy at National Energy Action, helping vulnerable households to meet their energy bills. We also have Greg Marsh returning to the show. He's the founder of Nous, a company which offers customers a live view of how price rises, interest rates, tax changes, and all that stuff affects their finances. Greg, great to have you with us again. And here in the studio, he's back by popular demand, friend of the show, I can't keep him away, our very own answer to Gordon Gekko. There he is, Justin Urquhart-Stewart, co-founder of Regionally. Peter Smith, let's go to you first. I'm sitting here as an economist and I will raise some questions about this package, how it's financed, whether or not it's going to stoke inflation. But I don't doubt for not 1 millisecond that an awful lot of low-income, vulnerable households were extremely grateful for yesterday's announcement by Rishi Sunak, right?
That couldn't be more right, Liam. You know, for 6 months or so, people have been absolutely terrified about where energy prices are going to, following the £700 increase in energy bills that we saw in April. Earlier on this week, the regulator revealed that £800 increase is very likely from October. And there's just no way that households were going to cope. The first package that the government released was very underwhelming. Although the headline numbers of that were quite impressive, a £9 billion investment, over 2/3 of that would need to be repaid directly by energy consumers. And it really wasn't a tool at the scale or at the depth that was going to be meaningful in terms of offsetting the impact that this will have. And thankfully, the government have listened. They have put in place much more targeted support, which overall is at a scale which is starting to approach what we need to see if we're going to get the most vulnerable people through this winter.
Now, Greg Marsh, you're approaching this from a similar perspective than Peter Smith and his colleagues at National Energy Action. You don't just cover energy, the customer services you provide, the app that you run. You help people manage their finances in the round, but you are very much in touch with your customers. How do you think this statement's gone down?
What we've sensed is that for some time is that there was going to need to be government intervention. We welcome this.
But it's not an emergency budget.
It's not an emergency budget. Be careful what language you use, Liam. We did expect something a bit like this, and we're quite pleased that it's particularly addressed lower income households. And some of the data that's also come out today, some of the research out today, was indicating that a significant proportion of households in the lowest income quintile, people on the lowest incomes in society, have no disposable income left at the end of each month at the moment. So if it weren't for measures like this, what we're seeing for lower income households is they were really up against it. And that problem.
And the economy could stall. It's not just the human misery. The economy could stall.
Well, a large proportion of households have already started to spend less. So this might have some additional effect in preventing the chance of a recession. But 4 in 10 households are already reporting that they're spending less than they were. And that is as a result of those rising costs of living. Now, the challenge, however, is that beyond the lowest income households, which the measures announced yesterday particularly benefit, we're focused on households who are middle incomes.
Yeah.
Because historically, middle income households have never faced, or at least not in the last couple of decades.
They see themselves as comfortable, don't they?
And they still see it as someone else's problem. So I've said before on this show, we've been polling householders regularly now, many hundreds of householders, a representative sample of them over the last few months. And people are still saying this is someone else's problem. And to some extent, the nature of the announcement yesterday and the further coverage today underscores that. It makes, I think, people at risk of complacence. What we would say is this is going to hit you. And by that, I mean everybody. Even the highest income households are going to feel the squeeze if they haven't already. Middle income households, as the waters rise and those energy price rises are still coming. Again, let me just put it in context. The measures announced yesterday for for a typical household, for a middle-income household in the UK, will offset about £1 in 5 of the cost of living increases. So it's only about 20% offset of the extra costs that households.
That's right across the income scale.
That's across the income
The bottom
spectrum.
third, the Chancellor's claiming it will offset about 3/4.
For people on the lowest incomes, those on disability benefits, those on universal credit and pensioners clearly have much more to benefit from yesterday's announcement.
And of course, I guess from your perspective, from Peter Smith's perspective at National Energy Agency, the danger of this statement is that it doesn't do enough, and it's only one-off interventions rather than a repeat performance. But Justin Urquhart Stewart, we're the economists on the panel. We are the dismal scientists, and the numbers have to add up in the round. You know, Jim Callaghan told us in the mid-70s, people are talking about the 70s now, you can't spend your way out of a recession. There are dangers here. Where's he going to get this money from?
It's a serious doubt. I mean, this chap, I have to say, is three stops short of Dagenham, because he's looking at the wrong issue, trying to solve something when the problem's already there. You can't just try and give people some extra money to try and feel a little bit better. You've got to go back to the issue and say, what is happening here? What can you do to try and manage this and reduce it? Several months ago, we were actually saying this was important, as important as the pandemic.
Yeah.
What action can you take to really make some important changes here? So encouraging people for more insulation and those sort of controls to start managing it that way, because these sort of issues are frankly going to make talked up yesterday to make it sound very important, but as
you want low tax, high growth.
Yeah.
That raising more money that way to spend on more vulnerable
as
people.
Greg was just saying, you won't have that impact.
Let's just give the last word here for this part of the show. We are coming back to the discussion to Peter Smith. Peter, you know, Justin and I, we completely understand where you're coming from. Of course, we need to help people who literally can't pay their bills. And for months, people have been lying awake, wondering how they're going to pay their bills, waiting for Sue Gray, because it strikes me the government was waiting for Sue Gray to use all this as a diversion. Anyway, that's just a personal view, which ministers would disagree with. But anyway, in the end, it's not going to do anyone any good, if we just borrow and print loads of money. That causes more inflation, which makes the very people who are struggling to pay their bills suffer more.
That's right. Dead cat or not, it's a vital intervention. And I absolutely agree with your colleague Stuart there, saying that about the importance of energy efficiency. We're far more exposed to this energy crisis because we haven't invested adequately in improving the quality of our homes and stopping wasting so much energy. Ultimately, that's got to be the long-term solution that the government uses to make sure that we're not exposed to future crises of this nature. But the short-term support that they have put in place is vital, and it is welcome.
Much to Peter Smith, Director of Policy and Advocacy at National Energy Action. We are going to carry on this conversation with my other guests and bring more in after the break. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. We're also looking at new research that claims disposable income has shrunk significantly for 2/3 of households during this cost of living crisis. Stay with us. You're On the Money.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 1:20. You are on the money with me, Liam Halligan, here on GB News, TV, DAB, plus digital radio and online. Today, we're discussing the Chancellor's huge £15 billion spending package to tackle the cost of living crisis, including support for more than 8 million UK households on benefits, plus a grant to lower energy bills for all households. But it's not an emergency budget, the Chancellor insists. But it does, in my view, raise as many questions as it answers. Support for vulnerable households was clearly needed, but how's the Chancellor going to pay for it all? Well, new research from money-saving app Shopmium found disposable incomes have shrunk significantly for 2/3 of UK households now, with 1/5 of the population having pretty much no disposable income left at all after they've paid for essentials. And joining the panel now is Stuart Sankey, head of Shopmium, the organisation which conducted this research. Stuart, great to have you in the studio. That's a pretty big number, isn't it? That amount of people with... What does no disposable income mean?
Well, money after rent, mortgage, mandatory payments. I think the research that we did showed that more than ever, the impact of the cost of living crisis is really covering more households than we've ever seen before. So a real shrink in money that you've got to spend either to do your supermarket shopping, which is the space that we understand and know very, very well, but obviously across the board in terms of clothing, fashion, lifestyle, etc.
And of course, the reality is we're already seeing this in the sort of fine print of the Bank of England numbers, which I monitor every month. You're already seeing a lot more money being taken out on credit cards. You're already seeing a lot more personal debt. We're hearing reports of more, if you like, twilight lending industry, doorstep loans going on, use of loan sharks, pawnbrokers and so on. You know, most of what I just mentioned are completely legitimate activities, of course, but not necessarily the best thing for low-income, vulnerable households.
No, but ultimately, I mean, the data that I've got access to and the space that I understand very well is grocery shopping and things that we do in the supermarket, which is something that every single household, rich or poor, does. And in the same way that we need to buy energy to heat our homes. And so the reality of this situation is that, yes, people are trying to find ways of boosting income or finding ways to spend more in store. But the reality is that we're all going to have to do grocery shopping. And so one of the things that we need to start to do is to be a little bit smarter about the way that we do that. So we all need essentials to feed ourselves, to feed our families, children, if you've got them at home. But we could all be a little bit smarter to do that.
And we are seeing, aren't we? I mean, this is just a fact. I don't want to denigrate any businesses when they're not here to defend themselves. But we are seeing in those supermarket figures a shift away from, if you like, the mid-ranking and more upmarket supermarkets. The discounters, they're actually increasing their revenues, aren't they? The Aldis and the Lidls.
Yes.
We are seeing a lot of people changing their spending habits, but also changing where they spend.
Totally. And so when we ask households back in the beginning of this month, what habits had they started to change, one of the key things that came up was looking for lower cost retailers to save money. And that was about 40% of households doing that. But there are many other changes. So more scratch cooking, meal planning more, purchasing. I think you talked previously, just before the ad break, about purchasing and consuming less. That's a key trend. And we've seen it in the news about skipping meals, etc. But again, just to reiterate, this is not a niche problem. This is a real challenge right across households. And so the people that we talk to are pretty much the average household in the UK. So all incomes and there's some habit changes that are really coming into effect now.
Some real insights there, Greg, from Stuart. On your travels, if you like, with all the consumers that you face and assist through your business, are you seeing spending habits change? And do you think this cost of living squeeze is going to get worse before it gets better?
We think it will get worse. We think it will get a lot worse, despite the measures announced yesterday, which I say benefit the lowest income households the most. Middle income households, exactly the kind of households Stuart was just talking about, have only about £1 in 5 returned to them through measures announced by the Chancellor over the last couple of months. So what we've seen is that households are trying to figure out where they can compress their non-discretionary expenditure. So one thing is shopping more cheaply, buying fewer luxury goods, maybe deferring expenditure. That all makes sense. The challenge is the biggest single costs that we're exposed to as households, for instance, the cost of our energy. There's very little we can do to reduce that cost because almost all of us now, more than 9 in 10 households, are on a standard variable tariff. So effectively, the price of our energy is not set by us. We can't change provider, it's set by the government. What we're encouraging households to do is to get smart about all of their costs, as well as the ones that they can control when they go to the supermarket. Make a list of all the things you buy. Use the free tools out there, like ours, Now StockCo, and the other tools that are available. Make a list of all the subscriptions that you're paying for every month.
Yeah.
The television subscriptions, the
standing
mobile
orders,
phones, the
all of
standing
that.
orders. Get that list in front of you and go through it with a fine-tooth comb. Are you really sure you need this? And if you don't, can you cancel it? Are you in contract? And if you're not, now's the time to renegotiate.
Justin, we've got Greg Marsh telling us it's going to get worse before it gets better. We've got Stuart Sankey weighing in with some really interesting numbers on, middle-income households now really reining in their horns. We have Peter Smith from National Energy Action Agency talking about really vulnerable households. It's really tough to raise grown-up points, isn't it, about constraints and spending within our means and not printing lots of money, so you have a sterling crisis.
Yeah, and it's different this time because we've been used to expensive things, the higher up market, this getting more expensive. The cheaper stuff, it's always been cheaper. Food's been cheap, energy's been cheap. Now it's the other way around, and that affects everybody, but the people at the top doesn't really affect them quite so much. So this is very different indeed. Now, the politicians have one thing to try and do is run an economy. Confidence, inspire confidence.
Yeah.
How do you do that? That's really difficult at the moment. The only thing they can fall back on, and thank heaven we've got some opportunity of doing so, is actually our entrepreneurial abilities in this country of setting up more technology businesses. That's fine. That doesn't affect the rest of the
25% corporation tax coming down the line.
And that doesn't help. We'll go to the areas we've got to try and grow the economy and make some money. Go to the bits we're good at. Unfortunately, at the moment with this, he's trying to sort of put sticky tape over something that's already occurred. And as you were saying earlier, we're going to see a lot more coming down the track, a lot more inflation coming through, and this amount he spent will look like chicken feed.
Justin Urquhart Stewart, thanks for that. Something for the weekend. Greg Marsh, you have to say it as you see it, and I can't disagree with a lot of what you just said. Greg Marsh of Now, always good to have you in the studio. Stuart Sankey of Shopmium, thank you very much. Fabulous panel. We have Peter Smith, also of National Energy Action, discussing whether or not Rishi Sunak's spring statement, which wasn't the emergency budget, we're not allowed to call an emergency budget, raises more questions than it answers. Now, a week is a long time in politics, so said former Prime Minister Harold Wilson, and that famous quotation has perhaps never rung more true, given the current economic and political volatility. In recent days, MPs have gone from debating apocalyptic food price rises to digesting the Sue Gray's Partygate report and now Rishi Sunak's spending spree. Well, our political reporter, Catherine Forster, joins me now to talk about this whirlwind week in Westminster. Catherine, let me ask you this. Do you think Rishi Sunak now is more or less likely to become Tory leader, given this statement?
Oh, my goodness, Liam, can't believe you're doing this to me. I would say genuinely more, because there are lots of people really hurting around the country, and this is going to help them. This has gone down very well around the country. It's gone largely well with the media, with the think tanks. Where it has gone less well is within certain sections of the Conservative Party, a number of whom are openly questioning what it is to be a Conservative, what the Conservatives are for when they are adopting Labour policies, going on huge spending sprees. And, of course, Rishi Sunak describes himself as a fiscal conservative and says he wants to be a cutter of taxes while raising them to a 70-year high. So there has been opposition. Boris Johnson, I would say, has always been ideologically flexible in terms of he's not wedded to a particular ideological position. Rishi Sunak wants to minimise spending, but this is an unprecedented crisis, which follows another unprecedented crisis with the pandemic. These bills are going up not by 5%, 10%. They are doubling and more than doubling. So he clearly feels that he has no choice. People like Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Brexit Opportunities Minister, feel that the windfall tax is absolutely the wrong way to go. But Rishi Sunak, it's popular around the country, and he's saying, well, OK, there is a case for this. So I think he will have made himself more popular around the country, certainly, but whether he can ever get back up to those dizzy heights, given his immense personal wealth or that of his wife, that's another matter entirely.
I think that's exactly right. And we'll have to see whether or not Boris Johnson is out of the woods, whether or not this, in my view, strategy of using these cost of living measures, so-called dead cat tactics, to move us on from Partygate actually works. But a fabulous roundup of Rishi Sunak's prospects. Thank you there to Catherine Forster, our political correspondent. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. After the break, it's our in-depth Money Talks interview with the double act behind the UK's long-established annual Manufacturing Outlook publication, which takes a close look at our manufacturing sector. After the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Liam. 1:32, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Boris Johnson's called the government's £21 billion energy support package a big bazooka that should help the UK through the cost of living crisis. Speaking in County Durham, the Prime Minister added that he won't pretend the measures will fix everything immediately, but they will, he said, be enough to get the country through what he calls a bumpy time. Mr Johnson says the package is a substantial commitment by the government.
I'm not going to pretend that this is going to fix everything for everybody immediately, and there are still going to be pressures, but it's a very, very substantial commitment by the government to getting us through what will be, I'm afraid, still a bumpy time with the increase in energy prices around the world. People should recognise that these payments will not necessarily cover the increased cost fully. I mean, you know, we can't cover every single cost that people are going to face. We've got to be realistic about that.
The Conservative MP Paul Holmes has resigned as a parliamentary private secretary to the Home Secretary over Downing Street parties during lockdown. In a statement released on social media, Mr Holmes says he's shocked and angered by the revelations in Sue Gray's report. He says it shows a toxic culture in Number 10 that's caused a deep mistrust in the government and Conservative Party. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says it's completely legitimate to support Ukraine with tanks and planes. Her comments come as Boris Johnson warns Russia's making progress in the east of the country. Ukraine's military have admitted they're retreating in some areas. The Prime Minister says Moscow's chewing through the ground and has stressed it's vital to provide Kiev with more military support. And a remote Scottish island's looking for a head teacher of its school of just 4 pupils. Fowler, which is one of the most isolated places in Britain, has a population of just 28 and 1 classroom. And after the last head teacher retired, well, they're looking for a new one. The job offers £61,000 a year plus relocation expenses. Tempted? TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.263 to the dollar.
The pound is 1.178 to the euro. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,472.49 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for real-time investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And welcome back. You're on the money at 1:37. Now, it's been a volatile few weeks on financial markets. Just recently, US stocks fell by a whopping 4% in one day alone. The pound's also been coming under some pressure amid suggestions sterling could at some stage soon fall below $1.20 for the first time since the mid-1980s. So far, though, the market's response to Rishi Sunak's spending spree has been relatively subdued, at least when I last looked. Well, joining me to discuss this is Richard Hunter, returning to the show. He's head of markets at Interactive Investor. And Justin Urquhart-Stewart, I tried to get rid of him, but he wouldn't leave. Richard, tell us about the market's response to this statement. You'd think all this money sloshing around, no real indication of how he's going to pay for it, no supporting documents about borrowing. Maybe that's why he's not calling it a budget, so he doesn't have to produce those supporting documents. What's sterling and the share price response been?
A bit of a shrug of the shoulders, to be honest, Liam. I mean, at the end of the day, I think there are wider concerns, particularly if it does fall out of this, that BP and Shell are going to be coughing up in their contribution, forced contribution towards the windfall tax. BP have already said they're going to have another look at their strategy in the North Sea. There's a wider question of whether this is the thin end of the wedge in terms of companies that are making profits anyway. It's not that long ago that oil futures went into negative territory, and when BP and Shell, admittedly temporarily, were losing money hand over fist, and Shell had to cut its dividend for the first time since the Second World War, they weren't going to the government with the begging bowl, as we've seen during the Great Financial Crisis, for example. So there is that wider element of could this lead to other matters where those companies making excessive profits can be almost retrospectively taxed.
And Justin, a lot of people now, they're getting ready for their holidays. If they're lucky enough to be travelling abroad, they're thinking maybe about currencies and so on. I heard a lot of chatter on currency markets recently that sterling was weak, that people were shorting the pound, that the pound could go under $1.20 for a while. It's now up about 125, 126. Seems to have rallied in recent weeks. Why is it that a few months ago people were talking about, $1 equaling £1 again?
We always love having panics like that. But I mean, it has been weaker. But let's put it back in perspective. Back at the Brexit vote, we had a range from 150 down to around about 120.
Yeah.
So we're still within that range.
Oh, yeah. But we're much nearer the 120, aren't we?
Down to where is he going to go lower than that? And I think there's no particular support for the pound at the moment. Because where's the growth coming from?
And the UK's got the highest inflation in the G7. We've got the slowest growth projection in the G7.
And also the other issue, when you look at it, where do people put their money? At times like this, you go to the dollar.
That's right.
You don't go to the stock.
So you think it's a strong dollar story rather than a weak pound story?
Yeah, but look at the pound and frankly ignore it. It ain't that important. It's important to us, nobody else. Would you go on holiday at the moment? Well, I wouldn't go on holiday because you can't get through the wretched airports, as I know to my cost. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the pound, Richard? It's something that people often email me about.
I think the irony of the situation is that if you're looking at the FTSE 100, where a lot of our money is directly and indirectly invested, it's actually a positive thing, the weakness of the pound, because obviously around 70% of FTSE 100 earnings are overseas based, and therefore they're worth more against a weaker sterling. That's one of the reasons, not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why the FTSE 100 has been able to maintain positive territory in the year to date. It's up around 2%. If you look at the main US indices, you've got the Dow down 10, the S&P 500 down 15%, Nasdaq down 25%.
Yeah.
So in terms of relative performance, the UK has tended to be the investment destination of choice this year.
And even though the UK stock market main indices have performed better this year, as you rightly say, Richard, you are still getting some people saying that we're not here to provide advice. Obviously, we're commentating. You do still hear some people say that the UK stock indices, they're still quite undervalued, even though they've performed quite well. Max King, who's a noted guest on this show, the writer of Money Week, a very distinguished former fund manager in his own right, he's just written an article saying that he thinks the FTSE's undervalued. Do you buy that?
Sure. In relative terms, compared to a lot of other developed markets, it is. As I say, it's only up 2% in the year to date. It's not been off to the races. It's simply been able to wash its face amid a lot of the inflationary pressures that we've been seeing. But, of course, it's been out of fashion for a long, long time.
That's to be the issue, isn't it? Because this time last year, the Americans had the rocket fuel, which is all the technology stocks. Up they go. Now the rocket fuel's gone up. That crashes down.
Because a lot of the tech stocks, they did really well in lockdown, but they've done not so well since, right?
They're down, they come. The rockets come down, and so suddenly we look at that much better. No, actually, Max is right. We actually find that we've got a lot of probably quite dull companies, but actually those dull companies are pretty good. What are they doing, remember? We've got our dividends back. Well, dividends back, you've got compounding. That's where you're making long-term returns. It's dull. But in this market, dull's quite good.
But in the end, if the economy does really turn sour, if it goes south, if we do enter a recession, and a lot of credible people are saying that we are now going to enter a recession. God, we were meant to be in the middle of a massive bounce back, remember? That's what we were told during the pandemic. But if we do enter a recession, that it will inevitably hit stocks and shares, won't it?
Yeah, of course. Although, arguably, it won't get a much sterner test than the one it's had in the year to date, particularly with worries about, the Fed over-tightening and tipping them into recession. If nothing else, you're going to get that spillover of sentiment. But Justin's absolutely right. A lot of the stocks that have been unpopular over a number of years, investors are now looking towards. These are stocks which are mature, admittedly partly cyclical, but they've got pricing power. And they're able, I'm thinking about the drinks companies, etc., able to pass on a lot of the price rises.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting that in the mid of a ESG...
That's environmental, social, governmental...
governance,
The idea that companies have to tick all these virtuous boxes that they didn't have to tick 10 years ago.
Absolutely. And so we've seen a move towards, and rightly so, towards ethical investing. But it is interesting that when push comes to shove, which arguably it has in 2022, the four best performing sectors in the FTSE 350 have been the oils, the miners, the tobaccos and the defence stocks.
Back to basics.
Back to basics.
Well, you start panicking like this, you just sort of say, sod it, that's it, I need the money.
Rich Hunter of Interactive Investor and, of course, Justin Urquhart-Stewart, co-founder of Regionally. Fabulous discussion. Thanks so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
Now, lots of you have been getting in touch about our top stories today on the dangers of the Chancellor's spending spree. Mike says Sunak could double the amount he just announced for pensioners and the public by getting rid of foreign aid funds. Look after your own first, Sunak, and then what's left, give to foreign aid. Peter got in touch to say a quick way to reduce the rate of inflation is to cut VAT and the green taxes on energy. If this stabilises inflation, there will be less need for increasing interest rates as a result. The government interest bill will not increase. And Stuart contacted us to say, if I was Chancellor, I would increase the tax thresholds in line with inflation and remove all taxes and levies on energy. I don't know enough about the pros and cons of the energy price cap, but I'm sure most people would like to manage for themselves rather than waiting for the government to throw them breadcrumbs. And Donald emailed us to say, yesterday's measures do nothing but put a sticking plaster on the problem. If instead the Chancellor had raised personal tax allowances, he would not only have to put money back in working people's pockets, help the lower paid and incentivise work for benefit claimants. And finally, Trevor got in touch to say completely the wrong decision to levy a blanket windfall tax on the energy companies' profits, who are also being told to invest in renewables and will only serve to increase further inflationary pressures on our economy and adversely affect pension funds. Help people, yes, but only target those who actually need the help. In other words, the vulnerable, the poor and the low paid. Keep those emails coming. Always great to get comments from GB News viewers and listeners, and tell me what you want to be discussed here on the show. Now, finally, it's time for my daily interview series, Money Talks. News emerged this week that the growth of UK commerce has slumped more than expected, with business activity expanding at its slowest pace since January 2021, when the country, of course, was in full lockdown. While manufacturing has held up reasonably well, factories reported the steepest drop in export orders since June 2020. That's according to the Influential Purchasing Managers, or PMI, index. And shortages of components, of course, including computer chips, as well as rising steel and energy costs, have hit some manufacturers particularly hard, not least UK-based car makers, as we've often reported here on The Money. Now, Rory McCallion is the author and Will Sterling is the publisher of the annual UK Manufacturing Outlook, the 2022 edition of which is about to be published. Manufacturing Outlook's packed full of case studies and insights into what remains the spine of the British economy. We're still among the world's top 10 manufacturers, and the sector accounts for 17% of our economy. So here they are, Rory McCallion and Will Sterling of UK Manufacturing Outlook, my latest guest on Money Talks. Rory McCallion, Will Sterling, great to have you both with us in the studio. I've read Manufacturing Outlook over the years, and here it is, a very fine publication. It is too. What's your general thought, Rory, on the state of UK manufacturing? I always stress it's a fifth of our economy, it's 3 million people, it still really matters.
It certainly does still matter, Liam. It's even more than a fifth. It's actually well into the 20% by the time you take into account the service industries that it's supporting, the commercial activities. An awful lot of commercial lawyers would be a lot poorer without manufacturing. It's a major exporter, it's a major foreign currency earner. It's a major contributor to our intellectual property base through research and development. Pharmaceuticals, automotive, aerospace, and even food and drink invest heavily in R&D. And there's one of the areas that we cover here, there's a section about photonics. I don't know if you're aware, but fibre optics were actually invented in this country in Southampton University, and there's a section in there about photonics, the sort of advanced high value add type of activity that is necessary going forward. And what you were saying earlier...
So what are photonics in a nutshell?
Well, if you've got fibre to the premises, if you've got a fibre TV station or something like that, that is using photonics. If you are, we're seeing it increasingly in metrology as well, in optical inspection, which helps to improve quality of manufactured goods. All sorts of things that have got high quality optical functions are using photonics. And it's also, one of the things I came across was, it kind of puts the Predator movie out of business because they've developed things that can see beyond the visible spectrum at Southampton, at Cambridge and other places. It's a fascinating area. It's one of my favourites.
Will, tell us a little bit about this publication. It is a bit of an institution. You feature many, many British companies, many, many sectors. I see JCB there featured on the cover. Can On The Money viewers and listeners get hold of a copy? Can they read it? Can they look at it online? Because there is such interest in our manufacturing sector, even among people who don't work in it.
There is, Liam, thanks. Well, on background, I think 4 or 5 years in print as the UK Manufacturing Review, where we took a look back at the previous 12 months across industry, divided into sectors, industrial sectors, regions, technologies, which are so important, as Rory was saying about photonics and the enabling technologies, and a discretionary fourth part that this year we chose to cover on mid-sized companies.
Yeah, so important. So important.
That's right. They're not necessarily listed on the stock exchange, neither are they micro businesses or SMEs, they're the middle ground. So that was the approach this year. We changed the name Review and switched to Outlook deliberately to look forward and give people a snapshot of the health and the progress of industry right across the piece for the next 12 months. There's lots of interesting things happening. In answer to your question about whether you can get a copy, we aim to have the website up by the 1st of June and people will be able to order copies via there.
Very good. Well, when it is up and running, let us know and we can talk about it again on the show. One graphic that I saw from the review, the Outlook, I should say, that I wanted to highlight among two is investment in electric vehicles, which, of course, is very, very important. And I think we can see that graphic now up on the screen for viewers. It's really striking to me, if you can see there, the North East, 4.8, I think, billion pounds invested in the North East. It really is emerging as a powerhouse of electric vehicle manufacturing, which, of course, leaves us vulnerable at the moment because so many of those components are proving difficult to get hold of. The rare earths, the ingredients you need for the batteries, the copper that's so important in electric cars, Rory.
Yeah, well, one of the things I was going to mention was about lithium, which is a rare earth.
Key in that battery manufacturing.
Absolutely. But we've got a couple of mines down in Cornwall that are looking very, very promising. And we may
back to the days of Pole Dark, are we?
yeah, it's not so much tin, but they go down the same holes and they can find it just lying around. We may actually be self-sufficient in lithium.
That's incredible.
In the not too distant future. The two pilot mines, which are mentioned in the southwest regional sector of the book, are actually showing a lot of promise. So that's something. But rare earths is a little bit of a misnomer because they're not actually that rare. It's just rare to get them concentrated.
Oh, I see.
So it's economically difficult to commercially exploit them because they're just spread out all over the place. It's like trying to get silica out of off the beach, you know? There's a lot of sand, there's a lot of silica, but it's spread all over the place. And it's the same sort of thing.
Here's another graphic I just wanted to mention, which not least because we've often covered this here on The Money. It's steel costs here in the UK. We can see that. And for people listening on the radio, UK steel electricity prices are £94.92 compared to Germany. It's £59.02. This is pounds per megawatt hour that steel manufacturers are spending on their electricity. France, it's £62.73. So UK prices are, a good 50% and more higher, almost 100% more compared to Germany than competitors. Our steelmakers are paying so much for their power. And that, of course, steel is so important in manufacturing of almost everything.
That's right, Liam. I mean, we need a sovereign capability in steel making because it's so important in the automotive industry, in rail, literally making the tracks and the trains. If we only relied on foreign imports, you can imagine what might happen in another pandemic or another global supply chain shortage.
Yes, we strategically inept.
Correct. I think that message has been lost on government for many years. But a real fillip, a real boost to the steel sector in April last month was when the UK Energy Security Strategy announced that the government would actually compensate steelmakers for the additional costs, the sort of policy costs. That's the grey box on the bar chart there, and either give exemptions to steelmakers or compensate them for that cost, meaning that their total cost of electricity would come down closer to German and French levels. Okay. That makes it more of a level playing field.
For now.
For now.
You can't invest on a for now.
I think it's a huge boost, genuinely, to an industry that's been lobbying government hard for probably decades to have a level playing field. Whether it stays the course of time, we never really know with industrial policy, but let's fingers crossed.
Rory, last word to you, and it's great to have you both here. Are we still a world-class manufacturer?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, in terms of the world ranking, we're 9th, or perhaps 10th. We're in the top 10. And there are certain areas where we are truly outstanding. Aerospace, automotive premium vehicles, we are outstanding. Photonics, which I mentioned, and a number of other areas, pharmaceuticals.
And yet we still invent loads of stuff and other people innovate. Other people put up the money and exploit our inventions. Why do we do that?
That's another. We could have a program on that. The short-termism in the stock market is really to blame for that. People do look to get out. I mean, even venture capital, they're looking at a 5 years cycle. In Germany, they look much, much longer. They look generations, and the support that they've given to the middle stand in Germany is an example to us. We should follow it.
Rory McCallion and Will Sterling, the team behind, the dynamic duo behind the UK Manufacturing Outlook. Great to have you in the studio. I'm a big fan of your work, and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon.
Thank you for having me.
All the very best.
Liam. Thank you.
That's all we've got time for today here on The Money, but stay tuned because it's Alex Phillips. She's up next with We Need to Talk About, and here she is in the studio nipping at my heels. Alex, what do you got coming up in the next hour?
Well, the debate rumbles on, doesn't it, over the windfall tax that's not supposed to be a windfall tax, but it's a windfall tax. And the news that Rishi Sunak is asking the wealthy people giving £400 off their energy bills to perhaps give it to charity. Will they? I doubt it. Also, what does Brexit and fish and chips have in common, other than Britishness? Well, 1 in 3 fish and chip shops could be in crisis. So I'm asking, is it about time we fished our own fish and grew our own stuff to make our own oil? All of that and a lot more. Lots of debate in today's programme.
Alex Phillips after the break with We Need to Talk About. Stay tuned for that, and you can join me again on Monday at 1 p.m. I'll be continuing to focus on the cost of living crisis, helping you beat the squeeze. But for now, have a good weekend, because this is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On the Money.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Showers will remain across northern parts of the UK, especially the far north of Scotland, where it will also be breezy, but otherwise plenty of warm sunshine as high pressure builds in from the southwest, and that's going to settle things down heading into the start of the weekend at least, with any showers mostly confined to the far north of the UK during the rest of the day on Friday. Also a fair amount of cloud for North Wales, Northern England, Northern Ireland and much of Scotland, and it will be breezy here, particularly around higher parts of Scotland and to the east of higher ground. Those showers mostly affecting areas to the north of the Central Belt, where it will feel cool, but towards the south, 19 to 22 Celsius for the southern half of the UK, mid-teens for the northern half. Into the evening, and showers in the far north tend to fade away, and it's a dry night with clear spells for most, and with the wind easing as well, temperatures will fall away. We're looking at widely mid to high single figures, and in some sheltered rural parts, just about anywhere, could see low single figures, perhaps even a touch of air frost across sheltered parts of Scotland. So a chilly start to the weekend, but soon enough the sun will get to work and it will warm up, and plenty of sunny spells will be found across the country. I think a bit more cloud filtering into eastern and northern parts of the country during the afternoon, and the odd shower is possible for higher parts of northern England and southern Scotland, but for the vast majority it's dry. Warm sunny spells, 21 or 22 Celsius in the south, 17 for Glasgow, 16 for Belfast. Into Saturday evening,